Hello students, welcome back to your SAT reading course. Today we're going to be discussing about the 6 golden rules of science passages. This video is for those who are struggling with the science passage and want to score full marks in this section. So today we're going to be talking about the 6 golden rules. The first one is to summarize the information. So since the science passages are often always about a certain animal, plant or natural phenomenon, or other scientific concepts, you should keep in mind a helpful mnemonic that you could use. So this mnemonic I would like to call is a WHW. So this stands for what, how, and why. So many of you may have come across this kind of similar mnemonics in your English class before. For me, it was who, what, when, where, why. And it is really useful when tackling these science passages. So after you read the information, the first thing you should do is to identify what or who is being studied. This is the subject of the passage. Next, you should take note of how the information is being presented. It may be presented through an experiment or an analysis of a change of a population over time, or simply it might be an observational study or a survey. And finally, what you should do is to determine why the subject is important. Think about why the author chose to inform you about this subject. Examples of this might include studying a species because it is endangered, or something along the lines of that. So it is really important to keep in mind the what, how, why mnemonics when you're tackling these science passages, especially when you're struggling with these passages. So the next tip I have is to actively read. So since the science passages in general are very information heavy, they contain lots of terms, facts, and figures. So actively reading and paying attention while you read will help your brain to sort and understand the information that is presented in the passages. So as you read, what you need to do is, a good tip that I have is to always keep your pencil in your hand and always move your pencil along the lines where you're reading. Reading shouldn't just involve your eyes, so by using your pencil as much as possible to take notes or maybe underline or circle information, this could be a very beneficial strategy for those who are struggling with science passages. So when you're writing your annotations, for example, let's say underlining or circling, that could be one of your two main annotations. You should not underline every sentence, since this defeats the purpose of establishing what information is important. So maybe you should reserve circles for important terms, underlinings for conclusions or principles, and maybe a star for like the most important information. So let's say this is the most important information, and after I read this passage, I'm pretty sure that the questions are gonna ask about this information. So if I put a little star on it, I could go back and immediately realize where the information is. So strategic annotations are really helpful and could be really beneficial for you. So the most important thing that you should keep in your mind when you are actively reading is that your annotations are only for you. So you must do whatever makes the most sense for you and whatever is most comfortable and effective for you. You might even use triangles, hexagons, whatever. It depends on your comfort and how effective it is for you. So the next tip I have is to pay special attention to the charts, tables, and graphs. So science passages often have corresponding tables, charts, or graphs. So when you look at them, you should take note of what information is being present by reading the titles and labels. Also, you should try to understand the information within the context of the passage. And there are actually two main types of questions about information graphics in the SAT. So the first one is just merely tests whether you can read the data. So tests your ability to read data. So in actuality, to answer these sorts of questions, you don't even need to actually read the passage to understand what the passage is about, because these questions are often fairly simple. And the second type of questions that the SAT may ask about the graph or data is it asks about how the data relates to the passage. So it's really important that you should be really careful with these graphs and charts, because they do not always directly correspond to the passage. So keep in mind to pay attention to whether the information presented in the data supports disputes or is irrelevant to the information in the passage. Alright, so the fourth tip that I have is, the fourth tip that I have is to look how the passage is organized. So for science passages, you might be asked about the organization of the text. Immediately after finishing reading the passage while it's still fresh in your mind, what you should do is take a moment to write down the structure of the passage. And this will be really beneficial when answering any questions that relates to the organization of the passage. So common formats may include describing a problem, then exploring possible solutions. That if let's say the science passage is introducing an hypothesis, you can write that as your organization notes. And since when you go back to the passage and your notes, you can realize that, oh, this passage is talking about a hypothesis that they are introducing and testing, and thus they are trying to examine the results as the conclusion. So by organizing your notes, you could really definitely strive and do better in the organization questions. The fifth tip that I have is to not use prior knowledge. Wrong answer choices may include information that is relatively correct, but it's not actually relevant to the passage. Just because a statement within an answer choice is scientifically true, it doesn't mean it's always the correct answer. So always keep in mind that you should solve these questions like you've never seen them before. You never have any background knowledge of the subject. So let's say if you had a background knowledge of neuroplasticity and the passage is about neuroplasticity, you should completely forget about everything you know about it, and then you should approach it with a new manner. Alright, so the last tip that I have is to skim the questions for the science passages. So though this tactic is important throughout the entire SAT reading test, it's especially important within the science passages because they contain a lot of information. So by looking at the questions beforehand, this will guide your reading and help you to know what to focus on. So you don't need to actually read the questions fully, but rather just keep in mind what the types of questions they are asking in general. For example, if you notice that there is a question regarding organization, you'll pay closer attention to that while you're reading. Or if you notice a question about the definition of a certain term, you can read more carefully when you see the term mentioned and highlighted. So skimming the questions might also seem like a waste of time for some individuals, but it would actually save your time. So this is because when you read the passage, you're already paying attention to things you are being asked about. So then when you're answering your questions, you'll likely come up with the correct answer more quickly and save some time in general. So that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope your studies go well.